My name is Rick DeYoung. I'm from BC, Canada. What I'm going to cover, I think most of you, I would at least hope pretty much everybody in this room is going to see as pretty basic 101 stuff. But every once in a while, it's nice to kind of stop the bus and back up and think about some of those basic things that we should be doing. So I'm hoping that this talk this afternoon is going to be a good reminder to you on some of the basics that we need to keep in mind when we're out there doing our spraying, whether we're dealing with nutritional sprays or pesticide sprays or tank mixes. There are some basic fundamental principles and ideas that we want to keep front and center in our mind. So I'm just going to give us a quick refresher of that today. So these are the three topics I'm going to cover. I'm going to cover chemical hydrolysis, which is basically chemical breakdown in the tank. I'm going to cover a whole bunch of things to keep in mind when I am working with these different products and putting them in the tank. I'm going to talk about the order that things go into the tank and things to watch out for when one thing goes in the tank with another. And then at the end, I'm going to cover spray volumes. This is something that Dell has asked me to cover. I'm going to give you the spray volumes Canadian perspective, eh? Yeah, so chemical hydrolysis, what is it? Chemical hydrolysis is basically the breakdown of your pesticide in the tank due to the pH of the water that you're utilizing to spray with. And so it's a reaction that breaks the pesticide down. Now that's a problem because pesticides aren't cheap. They're kind of expensive. So, key statement here. You want to measure the water in the pH of your water that you're using in your spray tank because it can have a negative impact on the pesticide you're using. Yes, a lot of the pesticides on the market today are stable for a wide range of pHs from 4 all the way up to 9. But you know what? Not all of them are. And we need to be aware of that. So the key question, statement number 1 that I want in the back of your mind, asking yourself, do you know the pH of the water that you're putting in the spray tank with the chemistry you're adding into the spray tank? Because it can have a positive impact, it can have no impact, but it can also have a negative impact on the chemicals that are also going in the tank with that water. So know the pH of the water in your tank. Chemical hydrolysis, we've got alkaline hydrolysis breakdown. It can break down, some pesticides break down with acid water. Most of the ones that we're dealing with are alkaline. I believe, am I correct in saying that most of the water around here is fairly alkaline, fairly high pH, 7.5, 7.8? I'm seeing some nods out there. It's very similar where I come from in BC. I come from the south central part of BC. If you get to central Washington and around that Moses Lake area and head straight north by about 6 hours, you'll be in my neck of the woods. We are semi-arid. We don't have igloos. It gets fairly warm and arid in the summer. We do get some decent winters where it gets a little bit cooler. But we do have fairly high alkaline water. pH would be anywhere from 7.8 to 8.3 in the pH for the water. We have hard water. Hard water by definition has a lot of calcium, which can cause problems for us with our spray tank. So I believe you're similar here. So it's kind of important that you're looking at these things when you're using your water, because you're buying those pesticides again. You're buying those products that we're talking about. They cost money. We want to maximize their efficiency in their use and not waste them. So if you don't have a pH meter, please get one. Know the pH of the water that you're starting with. And once everything is in the tank, you want to know the pH of the final mix, because the ingredients that are going in the tank can have an impact on the pH. We have spoken a lot today about phosphites. Phosphites are very acidic. Not a strong acid, a weak acid, but a low pH acid. Most of the phosphites we're working with today are in that 2.5, 2.8 range on a pH scale. They're going to have an impact on your water quality. How much of an impact? Depends on the quality of your water. How hard is your water? What's the buffer capacity of that water's pH? Is it a strong buffer so you can put in some phosphites and it's not going to have too much of an impact? Or is it going to have a lot of an impact? Really depends on your individual water. And the only way you're going to know that is to do some testing. Another thing, remember, water quality can change as you go through the season. So if you're taking a look at your water, the pH of your water at the beginning of the spray season, and just at the beginning of the spray season, that's not good enough, because the quality of that water can change over time. Now, it depends on the source of that water. Well water tends to be a little bit more consistent than water if you're pulling it out of a river or something like that. But still, water quality can change over time. So getting that water looked at periodically, and certainly testing that pH periodically, is a good thing. Don't expect that, okay, I tested it in April when I started the program, I'm good for the year, because you could be giving up some dollars in efficiency of product because the pH is changing and you're not aware of it. So test your water as you go through the season. So know the chemical that you're putting into the tank. You want to know the stability of that chemical. If you don't know the stability of that chemical at a range of pH, look on the label. If it's not on the label, ask your chemical supplier. Syngenta or Dow, they have done a lot of the research. They know the stability of that product in the tank. So if you don't know, ask. It's a good question. Buffer accordingly, and check after you've done all your tank mixing, because that pH could change as you do your tank mixing. Here's a couple optimum pHs for different products. Take a look at Captan at an optimum pH of 5. Well, we're working at 7.8. Yeah, look at Roundup. 3.4 to 4 is the optimum pH on Roundup. Now, I put Roundup on there. There's a little bit of debate about Roundup, whether it's alkaline hydrolysis at the higher pH, or when you go to that higher pH. Does everybody remember the nutrient availability pH chart? If you haven't, you can Google it online. There's a nutrient availability pH chart that shows the availability of different nutrients at different pHs. Well, at higher pHs, guess what's readily available? Calcium. And if you've got hard water, which I understand you do here, you've got lots of calcium in the water at that higher pH. So there's some debate with the Roundup whether or not it's because of calcium interacting with the Roundup and impacting the efficiency of it, or if it's a true chemical hydrolysis or not. But needless to say, up in the BC interior where I work, when I first arrived into the BC interior from the coastal climates around Vancouver, BC, which has totally different regime of water quality and soil pH, the local people told me glyphosate doesn't work. I'm putting it in the tank, I'm going out and spraying, the weeds I'm spraying going slightly chlorotic, a little bit yellow, and then what's happening? 3-4 weeks later, they're lush green and growing to beat the banshee again. What's going on? Well, in our case, it was that pH 7.8, high calcium in the water. Once we started buffering that water, Li 700 is a good buffer, by the way. I think that's around here. I've heard it spoken about a few times by Dell. Brings the pH down. There's other ways of doing it, but that's one way. I've even had growers go out and get battery acid, sulfuric acid at 30%. To buffer the pH down. But dropping that pH, we dropped the pH down to around 4.3, and you know what? It was like a whole new product. It worked. Now, caution, I don't know, we get a lot of generic glyphosates up in Canada. You've probably got a number of them down here. They're typically a lot cheaper than Touchdown and Roundup. Caution, and I don't sell pesticides anymore, so I can say this. There's a reason why they're cheaper. It's not just because they're from China or wherever. A lot of them don't have the buffer. There are some buffering agents and weather stickers and stuff that are in the Touchdown and the Roundup that are not in the generics. So if you're using a generic, realize that it's not the full meal deal as far as what's coming in with the glyphosate product. Just a little tidbit fact on the side there. So as you can see, look, Nova, no pH effect whatsoever. So there are products that are stable. So it's not like we've got to raise the red flag on everything. What I'm saying, by hoping you're getting from this, though, is know the products you're working with. And if you don't know whether a product is stable, again, ask. Here's an example of some of the half-lives. So 50% of that product's active ingredient has broken down at pH 8. Look at malathion. Within 19 hours at pH 8 in your tank, malathion, you've lost half your AI. Now that doesn't sound big, but how much are you losing in an hour or two? I had a grower that called me up malathion spray didn't work. Apparently I sold him water. When we went and did the exploratory to what was going on with him and why didn't that malathion work, well, you look at malathion on there at 19 hours, but at pH 9 it's only 5 hours. Well, he had a really high pH factor on his water. It was really high pH. Mixed up the tank. Oh, 11:45. I'm going to go for lunch. I'm going to leave the tank agitating though, because they always say, once you get the chemicals in the tank, keep it agitated, right? We all hear that. Agitate, agitate, agitate. So he left the tractor running, left the tank agitating, went for lunch. Well, I'm in for lunch. Oh, the cell phone rang. Had a few phone calls to return. Had an email or two to return. Next thing you know, 2.5 hours have gone by. Goes out to his spray tank, drives out the field. That took him another half hour. So by the time he was spraying, he wasn't spraying as much malathion as he wanted. He had a high pressure. So once you've mixed up a tank, even if it is stable and you've addressed your pH and you made sure everything's where it should be, go spray. Don't leave product in the tank and leave it sitting there. Once it's mixed, go spray. If you're not prepared to spray right away, wait for the mixing. Don't put anything in the tank until you're ready to get it in there and go out. This is all money. We want to be efficient. We want to maximize our dollars for our investment so we get a good return on investment. So, things to keep in mind. These products we're spraying, they have costs associated with them. They're not cheap. When we're spraying, there's a reason why we're spraying. We're not just spraying for the sake of spraying. There's time involved. There's effort involved. There certainly is money involved. So we want to maximize what we're doing because there's a reason. Take the time and get it right. We're going to talk about it again a little bit later, but it can't be overemphasized. Don't go down the field at 4 or 5 miles per hour if you've got a boom sprayer. Slow down. You're investing in the money for the product. Invest in the time to put it on correctly. And one thing that I say over and over to the growers I work with up in Canada, dilution is our friend. So we're going to talk a little bit about water volumes, but dilution is very, very important when we talk about foliar spraying. Know the quality of the water you're working with. I very specifically put the picture up on the left there with the vial with the background in black. There's an example. Now, I'm sorry I don't speak in ounces, so you'll have to convert for me. I'm metric up in Canada, eh? But there's about 100 milliliters of water there. It's hard water. It's local water from the Okanagan Valley. 2, maybe 3 drops of 1034O. Look what it did. It went from clear to milky. That's a precipitate. That's a reaction with the hard water, calcium, with the 1034O, which has phosphorus in it. We just formed calcium phosphate, which is a precipitate that drops out of solution. So it's no longer in solution. It's no longer available to the plant because if it's not in solution, it can't get in. And we just lost a whole bunch of phosphorus. So big issue. Know the water quality you're working with, particularly if you've got hard water and you're working with phosphorus-based materials. You can form calcium phosphate, which looks like this. Doesn't go into the plant very well. Oh, and know the organic content of the water. It's really important not just to know the pH and whether you've got hard water or soft water. You want clean water. And what I mean by clean water is if it's got a lot of silt and sediment in it, not good enough. Things like Roundup, glyphosate neutralizes upon contact with organic matter. You're out spraying Roundup and you got dirty water. As soon as that Roundup gets into that tank with the organic matter, you're neutralizing active ingredient, also having an impact. So it's really important with a lot of these products, clean water. So know your pH, know the other cations in there, and have clean water. Again, basic things that we're probably all aware of, but kind of a good reminder. So when you're spraying, again, simple thing to say, but when the season gets busy, there's a lot on the plate, there's a lot of things happening, but please start your sprays with a clean tank. Get in the habit at the end of the last spray, when you're done, clean out the tank. That way it's ready for the next spray. If you've got something, oh, that's just a little bit of Bravo at the bottom of the tank, I'm not going to be worried about it. It does matter. Start with a clean tank. And I know that's very easy for me to stand up here and say, But when you're in the heat of the battle and the heat of the season, it's a lot harder to do, but it's really important. Now, pre-fill your tank. Don't start adding product don't put the hose in the top and then right away start glugging in product. I'm going to put the hose in and start pouring in some system ready or some Cysticate. No, don't do that. At least half, I tell my growers up in BC, 2/3 full of straight water before you start adding anything into the tank. Acids go in first. So if you've got an acid-based material, and we've mentioned it a few times already, the phosphites, the system products, are acid materials. This is when they go in. So the acid-based materials go in first when the tank is 2/3 full, and now the agitator is running. After that, the micronutrients go in. So if you're putting in some Dextralac, some zinc DL or some manganese DL, this is when those products go into the tank. After those products are in and things are well agitating still, remember, right? Agitator's on and running. Then what I call the organic products go into the tank. So if you're putting in some Simspray 20X, some kelp, some seaweed type material, this is when they would go into the tank. Again, keep agitating. Now, before we add anything else, we've got our organics in there, we've got our micros in there, and before that our acids. Before we add anything else, fill up most of the rest of the tank. Don't get right to the top because there's a few more things that may need to go into that tank if you're really doing an efficiency spray and putting lots of stuff in. But fill up most of the tank now at this point, because the next ingredients we're going to add, it's really important that we've got dilution working in our favor than against us. There are certain things that go okay together when you're in a dilute state in that tank, but those same products, when you don't have that dilute state, they don't go together. So it's really important, add lots more water before the next things go in. Next ones to go in, your NPK type products. So if you're putting in 3-18-18, if you're doing some water soluble 10-52-10 or something like that, this is when those products go into the tank. So your NPKs go in at this point. Finally, the last thing to go in your spray tank, your chemistry, your pesticides. So if there's any pesticides going in, put them in at this point. Let things agitate for a few minutes, and then check your pH. Make sure that your pH is stable to match up to what the pesticide is looking for. And if you don't know what the stability of the pesticide is, what the pH you're looking for, ask your supplier. So caution when you're mixing with the phosphites. They are an acid-based product. It's a weak acid. So yeah, you're getting down to 2.4, 2.8, down in that range, but it doesn't have a strong buffering capacity, so it's not like a battery acid where you're going to get burned or anything. But you do want to be aware when you're using them, not all products like acidic formulations. One of the things to really watch out for is your copper products. I think Cap 10 would also be one that be concerned about. But there are synergies as well. Ken? Yes, thank you.
That's what Rick is referring to. If the nutrient-based copper is built to go in, it's not fixed, that can be fine if you use it carefully with phosphite.
Thank you. Yes, I'm talking, thank you very much. I'm talking copper oxychloride, so fixed copper. Much different than copper Dextralac. Absolutely. Thank you. And there are also products that synergies with the phosphites that like that lower pH, so it's a positive thing. But you do want to make sure when you're using the phosphites that you approach it with a little bit of care so that you get the desired impact at the end of the day. Pretty obvious, but I've seen it done over and over. Don't mix concentrates in a bucket and then pour them into the tank. I've seen it over and over. No, remember, dilution is our friend. Pre-dissolve the water-soluble products before you put them into the tank. For my growers, I beg them and plead them. You know that screen at the top of your tank? That's not where you dissolve the water-soluble fertilizer as you're putting it into the tank, unless it's the only thing going into the tank. But if it's not the only thing going into the tank, the screen at the top of the sprayer is not the place to dissolve your water-soluble fertilizer. Do it in a bucket first, and then pour it into the tank once it's dissolved in the bucket. Three key things. First off, pretty obvious, don't spray in the heat of the day. If it's a sunny, hot day, you shouldn't be out there spraying in the heat of the day. Matter of fact, I promote morning or evening, and if you've got a choice and you can do both, I prefer the morning over the evening, and the reason for that is leaf wetness. If you spray in the evening, coming into twilight, you don't have the heat of the day, but now you got leaf wetness that's going to last all night long till the next morning when the sun comes up to dry it up. Leaf wetness is important for disease pressure, so if we can spray in the morning, then the sun comes up, dries the leaf. We're trying to get under 10 to 12 hours of leaf wetness, so we're avoiding that disease pressure. So if you have a choice between evening or morning spray is better than an evening spray, and that is why. But evening is a lot better than the middle of the day, particularly if it's a hot day. You're going to burn, or at least there's burn potential. Do not try to avoid spraying on wet leaves. By spraying on wet leaves, you've now just added a random factor to your spray that it costs lots of money. It's going on a crop that you're hoping to harvest. Now you just put in a random factor that could impact the spray with the water on the leaf. Water doesn't, when it rains and your leaf is wet, it's not evenly wet over the whole leaf. You've got water pooling on one part of the leaf or the other, depending how it's sitting on the tree. It's going to cause problems. It could potentially cause burn problems on your leaf. So spray when the leaves are dry, and do not over apply. Think about what you're applying. Some products you want to apply what I call a concentrate spray, where you're going to get everything wet but not dripping. Like a foliar or nutrient spray, I'm trying to get the spray on the leaf, but if it's dripping fertilizer and product that I just paid for off the leaf. If I'm doing, there are other sprays like miticides and stuff that we want to make sure we got thorough coverage, so we are going to run off where it's dripping, so those would be higher volume sprays versus more of a concentrate spray. So know what you're spraying, know what you're trying to do. Foliar sprays, we don't want it dripping off the leaf. So lower volumes. And I'm going to give a bit more example of what in BC is considered lower volumes. Of course, the jar test, we hear that from the chemical companies all the time. If there's a question, excuse me, about a tank mix, do the jar test. And use protection. Here's something that is a big thing up our way. The packing houses in British Columbia are always out hunting around to make sure that the growers that are shipping to them are doing this. I know it's an added piece of work, but guess what? Spray every row. Don't think I'm going to crank the pressure up and spray 2 rows over all in one go. We talked about russeting earlier today. Well, guess what? One of the causes of russeting is uneven spray application. You're damaging cells. If you're damaging cells, you have the potential for russeting to take place. So spray coverage is really important to help prevent russeting. So don't try to skip rows. Go down every row. Manage your spray pressure. Again, manage your tractor speed. 2 to 2.5 miles per hour with an air blast sprayer is about as fast as you should be going. If you're going faster, you could be causing problems. And there you go. Uneven spray coverage can certainly cause russeting. So manage your tractor speed. Go down every row. Manage the pressure of your sprayer so you're not just trying to blow 3 rows over. And that will certainly help reduce the potential of russeting. Check your sprayer calibration on a regular basis. Sprayer calibration, particularly on an air blast, isn't a lot of fun. It can take a whole morning and you're going to get wet, more than likely. But you should be doing it regularly. Calibrating the sprayer at the beginning of the season isn't good enough. Check it as you go through the season. And I have a lot of growers on the nozzles, by the way. I'm not going to get into nozzles and T-jets and all that stuff. But I do have a lot of growers that at the beginning of every year start off with a new set of nozzles. They chuck out the old nozzles and start off brand spanking new. It's just the investment in the product that's going through the tank, and the need to get that return on investment is too great versus the cost of a few nozzles. So they usually start off the year fresh with a whole new set of nozzles. Just every year, every spring they order in a new set and away they go. Okay, let's talk about water volumes for a few minutes, and then we'll wrap up, and then we'll have a coffee break. So water volumes, if you're going to remember anything about what I'm talking about today, water volumes, don't cut back. Again, everything's going in. You're looking for return on investment. We want this stuff to work. There are specific water volumes we need to hit to get this stuff to work. And it's not just trying to get as much acreage out of that tank. So let's slow down, take your time, and get the biggest bang for the buck. Now, water volumes. How much water to spray on an orchard? Well, you've got different methods kind of looking at that now. We've got the TRV, which stands for tree roll volume. You've got PACE, which is out of the UK. And Canada right now is looking at what they call CASE, crop adapted spraying. What all these are trying to do is adjust the spray volumes and the pesticide going out to the volume of the trees, the volume of the foliage of what we're trying to spray. All sounds wonderful in theory. The Canadian experience, when we get pesticide registration, I'm not sure if it's true down here in the US, it might be, but in Canada, we have to prove, when we get a pesticide registered, they have to prove, before a company gets it registered, they got to prove efficacy, which means they got to prove that the product will do what they say it will do. When they do that efficacy work in Canada, ironically, it's all done at 110 gallons an acre. So that's where they got to prove on pesticide registrations in Canada whether that product will do what they say it's going to do or not. Here's another statement. Ministry of Ag in Ontario makes a statement that if you're under 56 gallons of water per acre, you're below the threshold of even what's considered a concentrate spray, which means you're not getting adequate coverage of your orchard unless you're spraying a bunch of sticks with dormant oil. So once you start getting foliage, 56 gallons an acre isn't covering it, which is kind of interesting. So if you got a 50-gallon tank and you're hoping that's going to get an acre out of it, you're about 10 to 12% shy on your water. Doesn't sound like a whole lot. It's only 6 gallons less, but 6 gallons is 10%, right? 10, 11%. It makes a difference. Don't try to stretch that 50 gallons over an acre. Remember, that money, there's money involved here in what went into the tank. We want a return on that investment, so we want that product to work. If you're going under 56 gallons, you're compromising your spray, plain and simple.
Hey Ray, so how do they handle the hydrostatic sprayers? Because those are using lower and lower volumes all the time. I have more customers that are getting those things.
And there's concerns with it. We don't have a whole lot of hydrostatic sprayers up in BC, but there's certainly some concerns with it, absolutely. Yeah.
So just learning how to use them, I guess?
Learning how to use them. But there's a lot of concern with them. Actually, we saw some people migrate to them and migrate away from them. And I'm believing they were migrating away from them because the products just weren't working going through them.
Right.
So they're not overly popular, and like I said, I've seen guys move back away from them. So, Ken?
Yeah, a lot of what happens on electrostatics is they're sold by an equipment guy.
Yep.
And the grower utilizes them.
And the whole...
And begins to have problems.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden he's complaining to the chemical company. Well, the chemical company said, well, you used the wrong water volume through this sprayer. And the equipment guy said, well, it's not my problem. Chemical guy goes, not my problem. And you got a problem.
We got it, exactly, that no one's owning up to. Matter of fact, a lot of Canadian labels are actually starting to say on their LVMs, not acceptable. Do not put through a low volume mister, hydrostat, whatever you want to call them. So we're actually getting labels in Canada that are actually stating, do not use through an LVM, low volume mister, so hydrostatic type equipment. So I think it was a fad. I think we're starting to realize that maybe not all fads are good fads, and we're starting to phase them out. The basic one I see as far as a sprayer goes up in Canada are the orchard air blast sprayers. We got some towers, as Ken mentioned earlier, the nice thing about a tower is you can get the good coverage and go a little faster. But with the air blast, if you're slowing down, you're still getting good coverage, as long as you're making sure you're calibrating and you're making sure you're shooting onto the foliage. Good discussion. Okay, so first off with water volumes, I am going to say as long as you're over that 56 gallons an acre, do what works for you. If you've got something that's been working and you've got adequate rates already, of course that always carries a lot of weight. I'm a big fan of the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid, which I kind of subscribe to. So here's the Canadian experience. I mentioned earlier about CASE and TRV and all those wonderful ways, PACE, about adjusting the volumes of what you're applying. You know what? It sounds good in theory, sounds good in principle, but up in BC, here's what we find works better at this point in time. There needs to be a bunch more research on some of these other things before I start recommending to growers to start cutting back on application rates and sprayer volumes based on foliage. So in BC, this is what you're going to find going on with the orchardists. When they're doing a concentrate spray, so for foliar nutrition, we're looking for a bit more of a concentrate spray, 60 to 80 gallons of water per acre. That's what I recommend to my growers. If we're doing more of a dilute spray, trying to get good coverage, like we're going with the miticide, trying to get under the leaf and get good coverage, we want to go heavier, we're at 150 to 180 gallons an acre. Those are the rates that we're using at home. So if you're under those rates, you may want to consider that you're putting some money in the tank and you want your best return on investment, so crank her up a little bit, please. That's it. There's a picture of home for those of you that have never made it to the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia. The invite is there. If you got a chance to come up and have a coffee with me, give me a dingle. Thank you very much for your time. Del, are we going to stop for coffee break now?
Yeah, just for 5-10 minutes. We need to set up for a panel, and then we'll let you go.
So 5 to 10 minute coffee break. I am around if you have any questions or want to bend my ear. And thank you for your attention.
We're going to have the panel introduce themselves again. I'm sure you probably know everybody up here, but JP, go ahead.
I'm JP Jacobson at Apple Grower, Pine Tree Orchards, president of Minnesota Apple Growers Association.
I'm Tom Marson, grower at Applejack Orchards.
Ken Gart, Agro, live in Salem, Oregon. I'm the National Technical Manager of Agro.
Rob Ford, I live in western Nebraska and cover Nebraska, Colorado, Kansas, and Texas for Agro.
Rick Young, I live in West Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada, and I'm the Canadian Business Development Manager for Agro.
All right. So the title of this panel was how to use Agri products to grow quality fruit. And it's very broad and it's going to deal with all kinds of questions. But really, it needs to come from you, what's your interest, what's your question. And one of the questions was given to me and said, would you have the panel address what do we need to do for a new planting? We have a new planting coming up, new variety. How best to prepare for this new planting?
I got one comment right out of the gate there, if I may.
Sure.
Do a soil test. Don't guess. Okay. I know it's basic, but I see so many new plantings going in, and they put it in, and then they call me and say, what can I do to help these trees grow? Well, the time to add the soil amendments is before the trees go in. You need to do a soil test to figure out what you need for soil amendments. Do a soil test, first and foremost.
We have bags and forms over here, so for sure. What else? What else should you do?
I would say to try and get a start as far ahead as you can. Maybe you know a year ahead of time, or maybe you know 2 years ahead of time. But as soon as you decide you're going to do that, get a PLFA test that determines the biological activity in that soil, and give it time to get started. Don't think you can just get something started cold turkey and create biological activity. It takes time. Time is your friend, and anything you can do ahead of schedule will pay big dividends.
So Rob, what would you explain to them? What's a PLFA? Are you talking a foreign language or?
Sometimes.
Most of your labs now will do what's a PLFA, is a phospholipid fatty acid test, which you have to take it in the summer months when it's warmer, but it gives you a good picture of the biological activity of your soil. And there's different ways to look at it, different things to look at. But as a starting point, it shows you where you're starting from, and if you have to, what you have to do to increase that soil activity. And then it gives you a good baseline to compare over the years of what you're doing is actually increasing that soil activity.
So Agro-K this year is introducing a new soil testing program called Agro-K Soil Productivity Tracker. If you want that package, particularly if you're doing a new planting, Rob, what would that tracker package include?
We have the Solvita CO2 burst, which is another measure of biological activity. We have a water extractable carbon and nitrogen ratio, and then it has a total basic soil sample that we're all used to using. And then once a year, you would run the PLFA test just to track that activity.
So we're including those all in a package. You don't have to test all of your soil that way, but if you have a new planting, or if you are having a problem area or something you want to address and you need more information, why isn't this more productive? We put this tracker package in to give us and you more information to help you address some of those issues.
And when you send your samples, if you send them to Ward Labs, attention Lance Gunderson, say I'd like the Agro-K package on here, Lance will take care of that for you.
And the cost of that package is approximately $100 for all 4 of those components, which is really, we're not trying to get rich on that. We're trying to pass that on to the grower to do that kind of assessing their soil and getting the real solid baseline. But you can't do one. So you see, we want you to repeat that test so that you can track your progress. That's the whole idea of having a tracker. What else for new plantings? What else can we do? JP.
Well, last spring we took out the remaining trees that we had in the block. We planned out our rows. We already have our rows marked out. We planted Sudan grass. We mowed that twice and tilled it in the fall, so we had better biology going on. Also, at White Bear, it's a big deal for us to mix some organic matter back into the soil because we are really sandy. So it was as much about prepping the soil biology as it was like preparing the soil for better water retention as well. I also have the irrigation main line already laid out so that once the rows go in, I can just hook up my drip line laterals almost, I don't want to say almost immediately because it's going to come back to bite me in the ass, but as soon as possible. How's that?
Again, your comment.
Yeah, one thing that we see very commonly in older apple ground is specific replant disease, going apples to apples. And it can have a big impact on some of the rootstocks that aren't as vigorous and really have an impact on early growth, early bearing, those kind of things. Dr. Mark Mazzola at USDA, when he actually done a lot of work looking at the different pathogens in the soil that have impacts on this. And if you have older ground apples to apples, in certain cases, you just have to really analyze whether or not you want to fumigate. Tim Smith, the former county agent there in Schlank, did a lot of work looking at specific replant disease going from apples to apples. And in most cases, fumigating makes a big difference. Now, fumigating is getting trickier and trickier and trickier, more and more rules. In certain cases, using some of these mustard crops that break down into methyl isocyanate, which is like a fumigant in the soil. If you can't do a regular job of fumigating, like Rob said, planning ahead, using something like that, do a natural fumigation kind of approach can be beneficial. But if you're going from apples to apples, be aware that over time, there's been a lot of pathogens built up in that old root system. And the old tree can take it. but the new tree on some of these rootstocks may not be able to. And it can have a big impact on how that new block takes off and how quickly it does. And your banker's gonna push it. You want early bearing. You know, be aware that going from apples to apples, fumigation or something that is a biological fumigation, whichever, can be a very important tool.
Just wanted to add, Larry, that if you're fumigating, you're doing a soil sterilant, you're essentially sterilizing the soil. I find it beneficial, if I'm going to do that type of sterilization, I'd like to get a re-inoculation. I want the microbes, the aerobic bacteria to really thrive afterwards, because you can do a soil sterilization and then contaminate it pretty quick as well afterwards. I found Biomax coming in after a fumigation stimulated those aerobic bacteria and put me on the right track to re-inoculation of what I want there and not what I don't want there in that soil profile.
Yeah, soil fumigation is a blunt instrument. It's like a nuclear weapon. It just leaves scorched earth. Unfortunately, the only thing that really tends to survive that are the resting bodies, the resting spores of the bad pathogens. They're usually at a higher level than the aerobic kind of that Rick was talking about that are the good guys. The aerobic oxygen-breathing ones are the ones that break the nutrient bonds that tie up phosphate and zinc in the soil and make them available. They're also the ones that colonize the roots and make the roots more effective from a foraging standpoint, things like mycorrhizae. And as Rick indicated, using the Biomax or the Biomax dual action stimulates those and get those from those low populations to a high population very quickly to compete with the bad guys, but also to help them thrive and make the biology around those roots thrive and release nutrients that are tied up in that soil, particularly phosphate, which is critical for root growth and early plant development, and things like zinc, things like that. So I echo what Rick said.
Seth, did you have a question you want to stump the panel?
No, I was gonna say something about fumigation too.
We replanted some Honeycrisp, and I don't have all the science, but what we did was we moved the row spacing because we wanted to have the trees closer together anyway. We went from 20 feet to 14 feet rows, put the trees 4 feet apart, and we added peat, organic matter, in every hole because we're pretty sandy. And when we watered the trees in, we put a drench on of mycorrhizae and then Simbex and micronutrients, or whatever your mix is.
Yeah.
You know, and basically like, well, we'll hope for the best. And then when we got the trees in, we had water right away, and we mulched them after we planted them, mulched the row to keep down the weeds and to build that. There was wood chips we used to build that layer between the wood chips and the soil.
How much water does new trees need normally? Like on a, he's talking about a sandier soil. How much water do they need?
Unlimited. For us. It's hard for us to overwater.
You can't overwater those.
Huh?
You can't overwater.
I don't think so.
that soil.
You know, again, we don't, we're not testing soil moisture, but we can kind of tell when it gets dry.
Yeah.
You know, if we don't get rain like every week, 2 weeks at the most, we're out of water.
Yeah.
Last summer we had some of the best rain ever. That's
For new plantings.
for the whole plant, for the
Yeah.
whole orchard.
So Tom, what kind of growth did you get when you did that?
Well, the new planting was kind of average. We got 6-8 inches. Usually the first year things don't really jump. But on the other trees in the orchard, we had from a foot to 2 feet of growth pretty much everywhere, which is kind of astounding for us.
Yes.
So this is maybe a little uncomfortable question, but if somebody's considering converting to the Church of Agro, which products and practices, and they want to do it in stages, which products and practices would you use first? Which ones do you consider most important, and then prioritizing?
Are you talking about a new tree planting or established?
No, both.
In general?
Yeah, in general.
System Cal, number 1.
Okay.
924-3, number 2. Biomax, Simbex, micronutrients, all kind of tied for third. And then some of the early season, the last couple of years on Sweet Tango blocks, I've used some of the Molly additives, bigger Cal Bore Molly and System Molly Z, that I think are both important. Definitely have had some fantastic Sweet Tangos last year. But System Cal has been a staple of ours for over a decade now. And I really like the 924-3. I've been putting it on the ground in my high density blocks, and I think it's given me a lot more even response, especially with Sweet Tango. One of the biggest problems that we've had has been the rusting on Sweet Tangos. And I think that 924-3 on the ground has really given us a good source of nitrogen while kind of balancing that rusting potential. Since it goes on in liquid form, it goes on really even. It goes into the tree right away, and then it's into the system and out of the system quick. I think it's really limited the rusting that we've had.
And when do you apply that?
I usually do 2 applications. I'll do one at about tight cluster and then one at maybe a week post petal fall. But I want all my nitrogen on the ground and in the system before cell bulking starts. So before that 30-day post bloom, I want all my and kind of in the tree by then.
And you would apply it with the same equipment you use for herbicide?
Yeah, what I do is I have a Phil Brown's spray boom,
Yeah.
comes off the side of the tractor. I slide the spray boom with the nozzles off itself. I take that whole thing off, and I'll put a garden hose on with like a normal water break or shower break. You can calibrate that out to do about 25 to 30 gallons an acre. And then I'll put 924-3 Biomax and maybe some molasses in there, and I'll do those blocks. I'll hit everything twice, about a month apart, usually between tight cluster and about 15 days petal fall, let's say.
And you said how much per acre?
I'm doing, I believe it's 2 quarts per acre on the 924-3, and then I have to look at the rates on the Biomax. I think it's a quart or something like that, isn't it?
Is that
Before
how you
make that conversion, I think you ought to see the high priest, Del.
Yes.
We're in discussion.
You gotta see the high priest. He'll help you.
Yeah, well,
Is that how you stimulate the growth of the new trees that you plant?
yeah, I do that as well on the like my new plantings and stuff. We got into the we explored the idea of getting our chemigation and our fertigation permits last year. I've got the triple indemnity backflow preventer, I've got all that equipment, I've got the injection nozzles, and then it got to the point where it was easier to grab a mid-level employee and give them a recipe and send them out on the tractor and have it ground apply. And then just run the irrigation, kind of as needed.
What kind of growth are you getting in the first couple of years?
It really depends on the rootstock. Bud 9s have been notoriously bad at our site in White Bear. We're really sandy. We get a lot of transplant shock. Our orchard site at White Bear has been an orchard for 100 years. I think that Bud 9 rootstock in general is extremely susceptible to any kind of replant disease there is. I don't think there's any limit to how long that block might be out of production. I think I've seen replant disease on Bud 9s even though the block's been out for 10 years. I mean, they're just, some of them, for whatever reason, some of those rootstocks, you put them in the ground and they just don't do anything. They just sit there. I think that the Geneva Series rootstock lives up to the hype as far as replant resistance or replant tolerance. A lot of our blocks now, we're going into high density. So our row spacing is changing, probably from 24 to 16. So we are able to lay out the new blocks, almost in completely new aisles. There is overlap every once in a while, You can see spots, like if you put a tree right where that old stump used to be, it will limit it somewhat, but like I said, we planted bud nines in ground that have been vacant for 10 years, and they just, nothing, they don't do anything.
You find any difference between the sandy soils and the clay soils? And have you done any replanting in clay?
You know, White Bear is such a different site because the soil will change, you know, from here to the wall. It can be completely different. We'll have a sandbox down there, and we'll have a huge hunk of clay, and then another 50 feet and it'll be a quarry. So it's really tough to get a reading exactly on what's happening throughout, you know, that block. If it's a 4-acre block, it's tough to get an idea on exactly what's happening with soil biology and things like that throughout the block because it's just so inconsistent everywhere. But as far as the sand is concerned, you know, Bud Nines and Sweet Tango, it's a weak rootstock and a weak cultivar. If you put it in sand, it's weak. It's weak sand, and it's just not happening. So, yes, Stuart.
Can you get enough nitrogen on with 924-3, or are you adding anything else besides?
I think I'm getting an adequate amount with 924-3 and adding the water. Preston is where it's really, I think, really been fantastic. We have 2% organic matter down in Preston, so it's actually some fantastic growing ground. My concern with the nitrogen in Sweet Tango is rustling. I think that what I'm trying to do is I'm still trying to put some nitrogen in the tree, but I just want it to be really moderate and really level. I think that there's a lot of different things that cause rustling. In my mind, number one is just inconsistency of the apple expansion. You go through high periods of expansion where the apple's trying to grow really rapidly, and then let's say you get a little drought and it kind of tapers off, and then if you get rain, it blows up again. So adequate soil moisture throughout the year, and just, you know, small little bumps of nitrogen here and there, rather than coming through with ammonium nitrate or MAP or DAP or something like that. I think the 924-3 gives a really nice even response as far as trying to get end of the tree. Am I crazy for thinking that, or is that all right?
Yes.
Is, are, like, System Cal, is that your only calcium product that you're using, or are you also using?
System Cal, what I do is I've really been writing my own recipe the last couple of years just to kind of see how far I can take it. What I've been doing is I've been dropping out System Cal once cell division ends. So I'll have the phosphite in the program until about 30 days post-bloom, and then after that I change over to just straight Vigor Cal. And then I try and do that on a weekly basis. But to speak to one of Dick's questions earlier in the day, we do have some older blocks of Honeycrisp that were planted in like 95, 96, and it's anarchy. Some of these horrible bitter pictures that you see in these presentations, those are mine. Yeah, those are mine. That's our Bud 9 planting from 96, and they are just, there's something about that tree, those trees, that if you don't get them structured properly from the start, they just, you just lose it. You know, that's it. They lose balance so bad, and it's so hard to get them back into balance. But those are marked for sure. I had a question for everyone too. Something that I was thinking of. When you're spraying your orchards, how many people have, let's say, one tank, a whole tank, 4-acre tank of just Honeycrisp? You know, so you go out and you mix your tank, and that whole tank is all Honeycrisp. Because we have a lot of tanks throughout our blocks that will have like 3 rows of Honeycrisp, and then 4 rows of Regents, and then 5 rows of Harrelsons. And I think what's happening, where we've had a lot of success, is when we're able to mix that entire tank with the Honeycrisp recipe centrically, so we can treat, you know, the Sweet Tangos and Honeycrisp with our Agro products, and make a specific recipe for those trees, and then kind of move on from there. Then I'll make, you know, I'll drop a couple things out and I'll do the rest of the Harrelsons. But think about this year, try and make a Honeycrisp mix and hit all your Honeycrisp trees in one shot, and then maybe move on to a separate variety.
How much difference is there between your mix?
Well, I think in the case of Sweet Tango, I don't do any foliar nitrogen on Sweet Tangos at all. It's all on the ground because I've deep fried them before. I've hit them with foliar and they've all come out looking deep fried. Just rusty, more rusty than rusted. I mean, it's horrible. So we'll do 924-3 foliar on Honeycrisp sometimes. That's kind of the big thing, it's just the nitrogen. I don't do foliar nitrogen on Sweet Tango, but I will on Honeycrisp, and I will not do foliar nitrogen on Harrelson either. For the same reason.
I want to just,
because I can burn them.
I mean, up in BC, we do the same thing. Once we get through fruit set, we're moving away from the system cow to the bigger cow. We're moving away from those phosphites. One thing though that I experienced in cell division, once we get past cell division, we're going into the maintenance for the cell division for the rest of the plant, not for the fruit anymore. But one of the things that I wanted to add that was an issue up our way in BC for a period of time is I had certain growers that were telling me KDL was creating soft fruit. But when we went and started looking into it, the calcium and the potassium are dual programmed. They work together. It's great to use KDL to bulk that fruit as it's coloring and ripening and getting ready for harvest. But if you haven't done your homework and pre-bulked on the calcium early in the season, that late season potassium could get you into problems if you don't have adequate calcium in that cell wall structure.
we have Orca, which is calcium chloride with the DL, so it's a softened calcium chloride. I gave some of that to JP and I asked him to try some on a few blocks. What did you see?
It worked. It worked better. It was in that problem block. It was in that problem block that we just haven't had a real solid crop off of for about 5 years now. I think the Orca, it got in there and it definitely reduced the amount of bitter pit. And by reduced, I mean we probably went from 70% to 40% bitter pit. So, but yeah, like I said, those are legal. So don't feel bad for me on those. Orca.
You know, Agro K, we have, I don't know, I was counting up the other day, I think we have 7 different forms of calcium that we manufacture and offer. And Orca was at one time our organic labeled calcium. We're not really promoting that or doing much with that, but I actually had some left over and I just said, JP, give it a whirl, see what it would do. And so he was the one who experimented with it just to see, how it works. See, when we complex it, we put it the DL, the dextrolac, we soften that calcium chloride so that you sprayed 2 quarts.
Yep, 2 quart breaker.
No tissue issues or burn or anything.
Nothing. Next year I'm going to try it on nice trees and see how well it works. It was kind of trying to put out a fire.
What was your spray interval with it?
Was that?
What was your spray interval with it? Did you just spray it once or how many
No,
times?
I did 3 applications of about 7 days. The problem that I had was we had some pretty excessive heat towards the end of it.
Right.
The first two applications I did was probably about mid-July, and then it got into like the first week of August, and we had a stretch of 4 or 5 days where it was in the high 90s, and I was just kind of staring at everything, waiting for my next chance to go out.
Right.
That third application I kind of missed on because it was just so dang hot. I couldn't get out and do it.
Right.
But I think it's got potential to be in the program for sure.
What did you do prior to that? That's one of the key things to really analyze too, is not just the Orca, but what you've done prior to that.
Right.
Will really be a big indicator of how well it's going to work. So what was your prior?
Like throughout the season or
Right.
the season before?
Well, both actually.
Okay. For the last 2 seasons, or the last 2 seasons, we dropped out System Cal after cell division, so that 30-day post-pedal fall, and we've switched to bigger Cal. So I was doing Vigor Cal applications up until I probably did maybe one Vigor Cal application, and then I went with the Orca after that, and then everything else kept getting the Vigor Cal. In past years, I would just go System Cal basically all the way through. And yeah, shake your head, yeah, exactly. Too much phosphorus, too much growth.
Too much phosphite.
Phosphite, excuse me, yes. Too much phosphite, too much growth, just,
Too much root flush.
yeah.
Bring all that end up, and it's messing the end to CA ratio on those honeycrisp, and lots of bitter pit.
Yes, that is true. Lots of bitter pit.
Right tool for the right job.
Right.
Well, not to change the subject, but, you know, it looks like maybe Mother Nature is gonna set us up for a repeat of 2012, I think it was 2012. Is anybody planning any sort of program, or offensive moves to be ready when, you know, the trees are ready to go in bloom or into bloom and we get snap back to normal weather?
Okay. What you're saying without saying is you're worried about frost, right?
Yes.
That's
Yeah, it's a long way of saying it.
Yeah, okay. You know, this is one of those cases, you know, I am totally opposed to foliar potassium during cell division. We know what it does in terms of antagonizing the calcium, leading to more bitter pit and more storage issues, and just not good fruit quality. But if it's a matter of potentially saving the crop, a foliar potassium in the right form, done the right way, can, if you have it ready to go, if you have a high quality forecast saying you're going to have a frost, and if 4, 5, maybe 6 degrees of protection can make you a difference, if it's a matter of saving the crop, I would say go ahead and do it. What I don't do is use foliar potassium, just throw it out there as insurance. You really want to base it upon the quality and the certainty of the forecast that you're going to have a frost event. And if it's a frost event that's going to be 10 or 12 degrees, well, you're kind of stuck. In Washington, we have a lot of overheads, and we use overheads for frost protection. But the KDL, if I have that high quality, high certainty forecast of having a frost event, and it's going to be a 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 degrees, and I put it on ahead of that event, that can make sense and be a good tool. So be ready to pull a trigger if you need to, but don't pull a trigger if you don't have to.
You think 4 or 5 degrees worth of protection in KDL?
Yeah.
And
Our
how many
experience
days?
has been that. We've gotten even more, but it depends on how you prepare your trees. What Ken said before, people who do a fall feeding and build those carbohydrates, we see it on vines, on berries, on fruit trees. Anybody who's fed those trees well and put them to sleep, they handle frost and that frost stress so much better than if someone who just sprayed KDL. I could say the good manager who fall feeds and sets those plants up, they are going to handle stress far better than somebody who's looking for the silver bullet to save them from frost. I'm going to spray KDL and get by. Don't put your nitrogen on, of course, early. Do everything you can. Everything that you can to reduce that damage, but I would say fall feeding is first.
Let me amplify that. It's a key point. And that's where I get concerned when people say, don't use potassium at all. If you want to have more winter injury, more winter stress, and have your buds more prone to frost damage, take potassium totally out of your program, and that's what you're going to get. Potassium has its role and its place. If you use a good fall program like the 0-20-26, getting a good P and K level post-harvest while the leaves are in good condition, you'll really improve the winter hardiness and the bud strength dramatically for the following year, at a time when it's not going to antagonize your calcium and lead to bitter pit. So you can use these tools, but use them appropriately and judiciously. And using the 0-20-26 or 0-18-25 with boron, post-harvest with the leaves in good condition, does exactly what Larry is talking about. And then if you need to, only if you need to, use the foliar, potassium KDL ahead of the frost event. But you help yourself hugely by what you do in the fall. and that's P and K, especially the K part of that.
Just want to add one last thing if I may.
Sure.
I tell my growers if they've got a frost event for the KDL, and I agree, it's part of an overall program. It's not the end all be all, greatest things in sliced bread, but it's part of an overall program. It works well. The window of opportunity that I encourage my growers is anywhere from 36 to 12 hours before that frost event if possible.
Usually you have a front that's coming in, and so it's better to get it on early than it is to wait until that 40-mile-an-hour wind is blowing it to the neighbor.
Also, vigor cal or calcium after the frost event, after the KDL is put on. That's another.
Yeah.
If there's injury, that calcium will help heal up. That's right.
So will the seaweed in there also.
Yes, that's right.
VC.
Bigger C
Bigger
cal,
cal,
super
bigger
C
C
cal,
cal.
or
Yep.
bigger cal with the sim spray.
Good point.
Anybody else? We're going to conclude here in a few minutes.
On that last frost event, we had 21 degrees in our orchard. Your products aren't going to, I mean, that's pretty cold.
That's too cold. Yeah. And I mean, it's already coming. I've been selling KDL like crazy already. I've had people from Oklahoma and Texas say, I've got peaches in full bloom, but there's no pollinators. The bees and the bumblebees and everything are still, is not, it's not spring yet. So thing is already blooming, but nothing to work pollination. So everybody's really concerned that it's this warm winter, and now it's warmed up so fast, everything is really far ahead.
I have Royal Red Honeycrisp on 5th leaf if anyone wants to see them.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was,
Yeah, that's the Willow Drive's Honeycrisp board. They're
You said
okay.
On
They're-
5th leaf?
5th leaf, yep. They're supposed to be earlier. They definitely turn red earlier. Whether they're ripe earlier or not is kind of up for debate, I guess.
They might fool you, might think that.
They look more red early.
Did they taste
Do they?
it?
No, they don't taste good until traditional timing, let's say. So
What kind was that?
that's a Royal Red Honeycrisp from Willow Drive. It's yeah, they're okay.
They're okay, that's really making.
No, I would say it's a similar red hue. It's just solid. There's very little, let's say less than 10% yellow background on it.
How do you get super small? Got any out here?
That is a good question. I have not. I only have about 25 trees. Our big debate that we're having right now is if we have a bag of Royal Reds on the shelf next to a bag of standard Honeycrisp, what are people going to say? What are people going to say? I have some other sports on order for spring of 2018 because I've got to start replanting, and there's nobody propagating standard Honeycrisp anymore. So I think what we're going to try and do is we'll try and sell all the standards first, and then bring the sports out after that. That's going to be our best case scenario, I think. So.
you see a flavor difference or anything?
Not really. No, it's the flavor, the fracture, everything's all there. And, I think it's pretty similar. It's just kind of a color. So.
Do you think all these red sports of Honeycrisp are pretty close to, identical, or?
I don't know. That's the only one that I've really seen. I've read and seen pictures of Premier and Firestorm and Cameron Select, but until I have it in the ground in my orchard, I'm not getting it. I have Firestorm is what I have on order because it's supposed to be a similar timing. I don't necessarily want anything to come in any earlier because I'm going to be up to my ears in the Sweet Tango harvest. So I want those Honeycrisp to just wait for me.
One last question?
One thing I wanted to mention too
Go
is, you've done a pretty good job, the JP in particular talked about the soil applications on a new tree planting program, helping the biology, directly helping support the root systems. Also what you do to encourage the phosphite root flush, using half rate every other row applications, nozzling down, using a phosphite program, particularly zinc, because zinc is required by roots for root growth. Using a zinc phosphite with the zinc goes down the phloem because it's in a phosphite form. That can really push more roots. And you know, it's like a house. You build a house from the foundation up, you build a really good tree from the roots up. And the soil biology approach that JP's talked about, fantastic, but you can amplify that with a good foliar program. And we have that complete set using the soil and foliar at reduced rates, nozzling down, spraying every other row, that becomes very cost effective and very safe for the trees, and really gets things moving much faster, roots and top, and building better caliber and better early bearing surface faster by doing that. So combine the foliar program the right way, right design, with what JP talked about.
I'll give Larry a copy of my Sweet Tango program if you guys, or I'll email it to you.
We can just put it in the plan. Everybody can access it. Let's thank our panel, and we want to thank you. Thank you for coming out today and spending this with us.